What are early signs of an abusive partner? Altruistic Fun 3091 said. Begins with subtle attempts to control you. They may even make you feel special, as if they really care. The next stage is often less subtle attempts to demean your friends and slowly cut you off from them. Of course, it's cloaked in claims of loving you so much that they want what's best for you and that your friends are good enough for you. At first, any attempts to resist are met with played-up hurt feelings by the abuser and claims that you don't love them enough. It eventually evolves into verbal and emotional abuse. By the time the physical abuse cycle begins, it's often too late to emotionally extricate yourself from the relationship. Dangerous Predator said. There are a lot of patterns of abuse. Some abusers isolate the people they are with so that they have no one to reach out to. They make the victim rely upon them, and thus the stakes of leaving or speaking out are the loss of the only person you have left. Some abusers make their abuse seem normal, and so they slowly raise the temperature to a boil, ever slowly increasing their worst behavior, and if the victim reacts negatively they lower the heat for a while and spend time acting like it was a one-time thing and they didn't mean anything by it and it won't happen again, but it will of course get worse. There is a pattern of abuse that is sort of like a yo-yo, where a person will do everything for you, make you seem special, bomb you with love, just give you everything you could dream of, and then slip some abuse in, and use the love they've blasted you with as leverage. After all I've done for you, you would say, act like my abuse is the problem, can't you see that I care? If I didn't care I wouldn't have done this, etc. Like family dysfunction, abusers come in a lot of flavors. Sometimes abuse can just be periods of neglect and normalizing a coldness towards the other person and downplaying any of that person's needs. It takes a lot of work to keep a relationship healthy, and even people who are not generally abusive can in combination create a pretty unhealthy situation long term. Dangerous Predator said. It is helpful, I think, to consider some of the signs of a stable relationship to know what an unstable one might be. Stable partnerships are two independent people who act with compassion towards their partner, but often not just towards their partner. They have a circle of people they care about. They have friends and family that would vouch for them in a healthy way. Both people in the relationship allow room for the other person to be who they are. There is respect for boundaries. There is consideration for the consequences to their actions. A relationship that can thrive grows at a moderate pace often. It is a small flag if a relationship grows too quickly. Oftentimes a healthy relationship requires both partners to be able to admit to having been wrong after some reasonable length of argument or disagreement. They are capable of apologizing and tending to any emotional harm that can happen in an argument. Both people are willing to put work into the health of the relationship and the health of the other, but not generally at a sacrifice of their own, especially at the beginning of relationships. That relation changes a lot, I feel, when people have been together for a very long time. Those are just general things. Not everyone has learned to be good at some of them, but you want to be with someone who is willing to learn how to be those things, willing to put work in on themselves in that way. I cannot be bothered 7 said. Just gonna pop this here a sec. Men, you have as much of a right to say no. It doesn't make you less of a man. My ex was a scumbag and manipulated me into some unpleasant things. I didn't think I could say no because of both her being manipulative and society seeing me as less of a man for refusing sex. Edit. I appreciate all the awards, but please don't spend money on them. If you're going to, I'd much rather you donate a couple of bucks to some sort of charity. If anyone ever needs to speak about these issues, my DMs are always open regardless of gender. Early Violet said. Even more subtle, overriding your opinions. My ex would literally say, you don't want that, you want this, when doing things like choosing off a menu at a restaurant or picking out an outfit to wear. It was so subtle I didn't really pick up on it as a red flag, but as time went on, I realized how it was a way of denying my autonomy, setting me up for attempts at greater levels of control. Edit. 50% of the replies agreeing that this is subtle and 50% thinking they would know better. Folks, abusers know how to test how far they can push things before you catch on. My ex never tried to override things I felt really strongly about. But like, ordering in a restaurant? I don't really gaff, so maybe they're right and I will like something else better? Might as well try. And that's how you fail to observe what in retrospect was a red flag. Cole Cypher said. If you can't have a mature conversation about the relationship and what you feel you need without being told you are actually the manipulative one, run, because they will try to tell you that you were manipulative to manipulate you into never saying your opinion. Edit. Thank you for the award and upvotes. Nice to know what I said made sense. Hey Theredaman 6969 said, yeah, this one is an absolute mindfuck. Had me questioning my every word and action. It was so indescribably exhausting. If something hurt my feelings, then I was being a self-centered bitch and a crybaby. I also got thrown to the floor by my hair for trying to stop him hurting himself. It of course wasn't his fault. I knew he had PTSD and I just shouldn't have come up behind him. Guess I should have let him continue smashing his hand with my frying pan. WTF Brad, who even is that? I also tried to break up with him so many times I lost count, but it always got turned around as me abandoning him because of his mental illness. So yeah, adding another red flag. If they won't let you break up with them, fucking run. Lilyhummy 2009 said, near the end of my last relationship, I couldn't even pick the correct things when grocery shopping. He'd immediately pick it up out of the cart, and then start lecturing me about making sure I'd pick the cheapest option. You could have gotten this instead, put that back, we'll get it somewhere else, etc. As a grown woman, being lectured about my choice of chicken in the middle of a grocery store was super embarrassing. Now, I buy whatever the hell I want, and it's amazing how liberating something so simple can feel. Parasian and Short said, for me, I could never go anywhere without him. Grocery, doctors, you name it. I especially hated going to the doctor because they'd ask if it's okay for him to be there with me, while he was also in the room, so I was afraid of saying no. Same goes for the dentist, he just expected that he'd allowed to be with me, and no one really questioned it until COVID. But he never allowed me too much time out of his sight. I couldn't even be in the bathroom for too long before he'd start asking me where I was. Morbid Munchkin said, I never understood this. I usually have my husband accompany me on medical appointments because I've had horrible experiences with doctors and need some emotional support, plus they seem less likely to gloss over my issues when he's there. But they always ask me if there's any abuse at the home right in front of him. No, there's not. But do you really think anyone is going to say yes when they are going home with that person right after the appointment? How stupid. T-Hab said, agreed. My wife likes me to go to some medical appointments with her because she's had doctors not quite believe her, think that she's exaggerating, or tell her that she should rest and stop working out completely, an important part of her life. For some reason, some doctors seem to believe it more when I say it, even if I just repeat exactly what she told them. I've heard many women complain of doctors who just don't seem to believe them. Over the years we've found doctors that seem to have fewer unconscious biases, and now I probably only go to 10% of her appointments, if that. I imagine that it's tough for doctors to know if the other person is present because they were requested or because they are controlling. PM Me Your Tits 85 said, I went grocery shopping with my ex and she did something like this. Everything I picked up she told me to put back for some reason or other. We drove to work together, we worked close by each other, and she would scream at me if I chose a different route that we both knew was just as fast. She would text me while I was playing music with my friends and complain if I didn't respond in time. Yodichkanabor Open said, I had a friend whose ex-husband did this to her. Her response was to immediately call him on his bullshit and press him. She told him, look, one of two things is happening. Either you really are suicidal or you're trying to make me feel bad for you because we're breaking up. If it's the second one, you're being a dick. You're trying to manipulate me because you know I still care about you even though we're not in a relationship. If it's the first, you need to let me know right this instance, because if so, I'm calling the cops and you're going to the hospital. Here's the most important part, she meant every word and he knew it. Essentially, she put him between the rock and hard place. He could either admit he was being manipulative, or he could say he needed to go to the hospital. The important part here is she was willing to follow through and he knew it. He only ever tried it once. Edit. A few edits since this blew up. A few of you are saying you should not call the cops to do a wellness check. I certainly understand that inclination. My friend threatened to call the cops for a few reasons. 1. She was home alone with her small children and didn't want to drag them into a midnight visit with their ex-stepdad, and 2. This was over 10 years ago and her comfort level with the local police was good. Yodichkanabor Open said, but you could make the same point, enforce decision for your manipulative ex, without calling the cops. If you're serious, we are driving right now to the hospital, or I'm calling your mom, dad, best friend to get them to lend support because I can't be in this position, etc. Pick a response that forces them to put themselves out there for help, and follow through. It can't go wrong. Either way, you know you did your best to try to get them help, even if they are manipulative as wad. Also, I've had siblings get drunk and do this with me, call drunk and threatening suicide, and my message is always the same: I love you. I'm taking this seriously, and I need to know if you're serious. I think you need help. You can either call X, Y, or Z to come stay with you, since I don't live close by, or I'm calling the cops for a wellness check. My father also committed suicide over 11 years ago, so I take this shit seriously when people even begin to mention remotely suicidal thoughts. TLDR, call them on their bullshit. TLDR for the edit, you have options. Goddammit 5 said. When I was around 16, I was kind of seeing a guy for about 2 months before deciding to break up. He threatened suicide and I brushed him off. Next thing I know, my bird aviary has been vandalized, my mom's car has been keyed up, and he's been admitted to hospital with a drug overdose. I was not responsible for any of those things. He was. If someone is threatening suicide over a breakup, there's more to the story and they need help, not placating. Shayla said. I'm very ashamed to admit, but I have done this. He was leaving and I was devastated and I told him I was going to kill myself if he left. And I was suicidal. I'd had a miscarriage and lost my mom and I didn't know how to live without him. I thought telling him, threatening him, if I'm being completely honest, would convince him to stay. He called my dad and the police and left. And it was the best thing he could have done. I went to hospital, was treated for my depression and am a much stronger and more stable person for it. Honestly, I'm so grateful and also a little proud of him for making that decision because it could not have been easy. Redder 2290 said. And then you start walking on eggshells and hyper-evaluating what you say before you say it, because you're never quite sure what's going to set them off and turn into a fight. But if you ever try to open up to them about how you feel like you're having to walk on eggshells around them, it becomes your fault. That's not healthy to do. How could you think so little of them, to feel like you need to do that? Why would you act that way around them? And suddenly a discussion about your feelings turns into a fight about how you've hurt them. Again. Rinse and repeat. Rental Dude said. My ex very slowly made it impossible to see any friends that weren't his, and I rarely saw my family. I didn't realize what was happening while it was happening. He was also had to know where I was at every moment. I didn't realize how abusive the relationship was until I started dating someone new. I would ask him permission to hang out with my friends or apologize that I missed a phone call, and he would look at me funny. You don't need to ask me every time you want to do something. It took a couple of years to break those habits. And now I'm fully other side of the spectrum. I get extremely annoyed when my boyfriend asks me where I am and what I'm doing. It feels controlling. The damage has definitely been done and I have a lot of work to do on myself because of it. Floss 147 said. Hates your friends' relatives and will repeatedly make critical comments, to isolate you. Picks fights over silly things, to test boundaries. Makes out that they're the only one who cares about you, to make you rely on them. Repeatedly brings up the favors they've done, to get you to comply. Makes promises they never keep, even the little ones, because it makes you look crazy and abusive when you get upset. Subtle criticism of your clothes, body and behavior, so you'll be worn down and have low self-esteem because it makes you more compliant. Gaslighting, so you question your sanity. Controlling the income, stealing money, so you rely on them. Spreading lies to those in your inner and outer circle, to isolate you. This isn't an exhaustive list, just some of what I went through before the abuse escalated to sexual and physical abuse. Just remember, sometimes you have to trust your instincts, and sometimes you have to forgive yourself because you won't see the warning signs until it's too late. My ex went so far as to blame a medical condition for him raping me. He never had that condition, it just fit his narrative so he could blame me. Edit to add, I also couldn't have a social life and go out with friends, but he could. Edit to, thank you for all of your kind awards. I didn't expect this sort of response, but I hope people find my experience comment helpful to recognize situations they may find themselves in. Redder 2290 said. Yes. When I was trying to figure out if my relationship was abusive, hint, if you're ever asking yourself this question, just get out. I didn't think he was isolating me. I could still see my friends and family, and did often. But then I realized I was always having to pick between them. He hated my grandparents. He hated my parents. My mom was a bitch. He didn't like my siblings, they were boring. He didn't like my friends, they were boring. So anytime I'd want to spend time with my family friends, I was having to choose between seeing them and seeing him. Major holidays, family get-togethers, friends coming in town, it was almost always him or them. And if he would go, he would find a way to make the experience unenjoyable. And as far as the subtle criticism, I want people to know that jokes count. It's not just serious statements. Making mean jokes about the way you look, or act, or your preferences, etc. And if you ask them not to make jokes like that anymore, an abuser will tell you it was just a joke. You're being too sensitive and will continue to use the jokes as ammunition. A healthy partner will not do this. Colorful Thoughts said, "This one needs to be way higher up. I had an ex like that who essentially guilt-tripped me into a relationship and into staying by saying that I will be his last chance and that if we don't work out that he'll give up on love, which is the one thing that makes him happy, and that he'll live the rest of his life miserable and waste away," which in my ears sounded even worse than just him threatening suicide. And to add on to that, if they disrespect boundaries you set. I told him that I was not comfortable with sexual comments and innuendos and advances due to recent sexual abuse, and he continued to make them every single day. And when I called him out on it, he'd turn around and call himself the worst person on the planet, and how he shouldn't be alive, how could I be with him, blah blah blah. Basically talk himself down so much that me being like, hey, you know, could you maybe not do that cause it makes me kind of uncomfortable? Sorry turned into me talking him down from his self-deprecating rant for the next 2+ hours, telling him he's a good person and that he didn't do anything wrong. Fat01 said, "Yes, so true. I was raised to always try to see the other person's point of view, accommodate, be the bigger person. I was raised to be abused." Edit. I appreciate the abundance of support in response to this comment, but need to add that I learned a great deal at a bad time in my life, and I'm now happily in a healthy relationship. Bless you all though. SSDD and a bounce na play said, "If someone is real determined, they can take psychological issues you already have under control and whip them into a breakdown over and over. Make it worse and worse until you can't even feel the warmth of the sun. Push you until nothing is good anymore. Then all their behaviors seem the same. Everything seems the same. There's no more crazy meter because you know you're the crazy one. Nothing hurts and nothing feels. You don't trust yourself because the crazy obviously came from inside. It's the same old problems. You start thinking he's right. You must not be hearing yourself well. Maybe you are yelling. Maybe you are losing stretches of time where you rage like he does. Then you talk to the neighbor. She only hears you crying and begging for your life. It's gargantuan hard to yank your mind around in that instant. His voice says that you're being dramatic, looking for attention, trying to prove you don't need to change by getting people on your side. But the crack is there. Some part of you hurt or fear for your life. You tell the neighbor there are some problems but that you'll be okay. And you believe it. You don't see the bruises that haven't left your face yet. You don't recognize that this is the first time she's seen you outside in a week and a half and all your plants are dead. You don't know that you've dropped into a dissociated state and you're just waiting to die." Ramanudahun said, "This is exactly what happened to a past friend of mine. I'm not trying to up your own story with a different one, though if that ends up coming across I'm sorry, I'll remove it. Just wanted to share a story that you reminded me of. Her partner was extremely emotionally abusive, and was frighteningly good at what he did. He also gravitated towards her because she had bipolar disorder, proper treatment for which is hard to find in the country I live in. I met her by accident in a bar while she was watching him trying to pick up an unconscious woman he was drinking with and take her to a taxi. He was thrown out by the bar owner who saw a rape in progress and put her foot down. She told me he was at the stage of bringing people home to sleep with while she was in the same room, and she'd sleep on the sofa. He'd already separated her from friends and family. By the time she managed to break free of him, she'd been through several suicide attempts, he'd gotten her pregnant, promised marriage before flying home for Christmas and promptly sleeping with someone else after returning, and she'd gotten a black market abortion after he'd thrown her identity documents in the trash, making her unable to legally seek an abortion in the country we lived in. She'd suffered complications as a result of the illegal abortion and might struggle to get pregnant again in the future. Manudahan said, though she disappeared from my life shortly afterwards and in no way whatsoever had a positive outcome, I'm glad she managed to get away from him at least. We supported her as much as we could, but there was only so much friends could do when he had her wrapped so tightly around his finger. He used her bipolar disorder as his main control, locking her out and ignoring her when she was in dark times and horrible depression, then using her positive mood periods to pull her back, apologizing, crying and begging at her feet for her not to leave. She'd often black out in clubs during the worst periods, wake up somewhere unfamiliar minus her ID and money, vanish off all her social radar, and he'd just ignore her. After all, she'd be waiting outside the apartment door one way or another. I'd heard stories of terribly abusive people before, but that was the first time I'd seen a real, truly evil person. From his own words, if she died one day then he'd just be minus a difficult person in his life. If she stayed around then he wouldn't have to look so hard for sex. Makes me feel ill just typing it. From her experience I learned very clearly that escaping abuse as a victim can be the hardest thing in the entire world to them, and it is absolutely not their fault. Adeline said, your feelings don't matter, and no matter what happens, everything is your fault. You're trying to talk about a problem and by the end of the conversation you're the one apologizing. My ex-boyfriend never once uttered the words, I'm sorry straightforwardly. If anything, it was always, I'm sorry you feel that way. Edit. I didn't expect this to blow up the way it did, but I just wanted to say that everyone sharing their experiences here is a strong, beautiful soul and I hope things get better for each and every one of you. I like Llamas 678 said. My ex was exactly like this. I was always at fault, be it in actions, or an emotion elicited by an action. Whatever it was my problem and I was loading it onto his back, so I was blamed for all of it. You are offended I called you a lazy bitch? How dare you make me feel bad about myself? It is your problem that you feel hurt, not mine. You shouldn't even be hurt because it is simply the truth. You are too tired to cook after working 10 hours? Fuck you, you don't care about my needs, you only care about yours. What do you think I've been doing all day? I work way harder than you. You need to pick up the slack and pull your weight. You don't like being woken up in the middle of the night for sex because I had a wet dream? You are a lazy, ungrateful piece of shit that doesn't care about my needs. If you cared about me, you'd have sex with me right now. You selfish, lazy, whore. It goes on. It was not pretty. Adeline said, I feel you there. My ex literally asked me if I was secretly asexual because I didn't want to have sex after a really long and pretty miserable day at university. Now, no offense to asexuals, they're all valid and wonderful, but I'm simply not asexual myself. I just didn't want to have sex whenever he felt like it. Of course when I felt like it, I had a hard day at work, so I don't feel like it was a perfectly valid response because it came from him. The constant hypocrisy was what really got me. Like, when I got distracted from uni work, I was being lazy, but when he delayed his work to dick around in 10 different video games for 5 hours, that was no problem at all, obviously. McManus said, my relationship with my family has caused my past partners to stop and think. I understand why. Family is important to most people, and the idea that I have such disdain for my own is weird. But that family was neglectful, abusive, cruel, manipulative, and ruined my life without me even realizing it. Years into being single again, I've come to realize the truth about my childhood, and feel that about only healthy thing I can do with them is never speaking to them again. My life is deeply affected by all of the wrong lessons childhood and adolescence taught me. In spite of all this, I've done my absolute best to be an objective, reasonable, and fair partner. I don't know that I've been successful. After all, I've been on my own now the longest time since I started dating. Anyway, I just wanted to say, I see why this is a red flag. But there are those of us out here who are damaged, for a reason, who know it, and who refuse to let their broken side overcome their good sense. Asher said, lying, blaming you for random things causing arguments, small acts of violence, physical or mental, threats of violence or name-calling etc., limiting contact with family and friends, belittling you or your opinions, saying they're right even if they're not, trying to control what you do or where you go, manipulating, changing emotions fast, like being angry and then trying to make you feel sorry for something or apologizing randomly but not really acting any different later. These to name a few, but obviously it depends on the person.